12th century, central Cambodia. A temple weighing 1.5 million tons floats on sand and clay above a water table that should have swallowed it. The moat around Angkor Wat is 200 meters wide, not for defense, for foundation control. The stone sits on hydraulic quicksand, and the moat is the only thing keeping it level. When you look at the temple, you are looking at the visible anchor of a machine that stretches across hundreds of square kilometers. A machine built to move water by the cubic kilometer. A machine that fed 1 million people before London had 50,000. The official story calls it a temple. The engineering calls it a control node. The numbers make it impossible to see Angkor Wat as anything but the centerpiece of a pre-industrial megacity that ran on gravity-fed plumbing and collapsed when the water stopped obeying. That is exactly what we are going to find out. Angkor Wat is not alone in the jungle. It never was. For centuries, the image sold to the world was a single sacred monument rising from the trees, rediscovered by French explorers, romantic and isolated. That image is a lie of omission. In 2013, airborne laser scanning stripped the canopy away. What appeared underneath was a grid. City blocks, canals, embankments, ponds, roads, reservoirs the size of inland seas, an urban sprawl larger than any medieval city in Europe. Angkor was not a temple complex. It was a hydraulic civilization. The temple was the administrative and religious heart, but the body was water. Channels, basins, sluice gates, dikes, and distribution networks that moved monsoon floods into rice fields, then drained them in the dry season, then refilled them on command. The entire system was designed to turn a climate of extremes into a food factory that could support the largest pre-industrial population density on Earth. 3 rice harvests a year. Surplus grain stored in quantities that funded the construction of over 1,000 stone temples across 2 centuries. That scale does not happen by accident. It happens when water moves where you tell it to move. And the engineering required to make that happen is not decorative. It is structural. It is the skeleton beneath the skin. The temple itself sits inside a rectangular moat measuring 1.5 kilometers by 1.3 kilometers. The moat is not a decorative feature. It is a hydraulic cushion. Angkor Wat rests on a foundation of sand over clay. The water table is high. The soil is soft. If the groundwater level drops, the clay contracts. If it rises too fast, the sand liquefies. Either condition would crack a structure this size in half. The moat solves that problem by keeping the soil beneath the temple permanently saturated at a controlled level. The water pressure stabilizes the clay. The sand drains into the moat when it needs to. The moat acts as a buffer tank. It absorbs fluctuations. It keeps the stone floating on a hydraulic cushion that never shifts. The temple is not sitting on bedrock. It is sitting on water. And the moat is the governor that keeps the water table flat. Beneath the stone is a sand platform roughly 8 meters thick. That platform is not fill. It is engineered drainage. The sand allows water to move horizontally beneath the temple without building pressure. It distributes the weight of 1.5 million tons across a soft substrate that would otherwise compress unevenly. The sand breathes. It flexes. It allows the foundation to settle without cracking. Above the sand is the stone. Sandstone blocks weighing up to 1.5 tons each, fitted without mortar, stacked into 5 nested galleries and a central tower that rises 65 meters above the ground. The tower is not a spire. It is a counterweight. It presses the entire structure down into the sand platform with enough force to lock the blocks together through compression alone. The temple holds itself up by pushing down. That only works if the ground beneath it stays level, and the ground only stays level if the water table stays controlled. The moat is not ornament. It is load-bearing infrastructure. Now pull back. The moat around Angkor Wat connects to a canal. That canal connects to a reservoir. That reservoir connects to another canal. That canal connects to another reservoir. The reservoirs are called barais. The West Barai is 8 kilometers long and 2.2 kilometers wide. It holds 53 million cubic meters of water. To put that in perspective, that is enough water to cover Manhattan to a depth of 1 meter. The Barai was not dug, it was built. Workers piled millions of tons of soil into embankments up to 12 meters high, then lined the interior with clay to prevent seepage. The embankments were wide enough to serve as highways. They stayed dry during the monsoon. They connected the city. The reservoirs were not lakes. They were elevated storage tanks. They sat higher than the surrounding rice fields. That elevation created hydraulic head. Water flowed out through sluice gates into distribution canals that branched into smaller channels that fed individual field systems. The flow was controlled by gates. Open the gate, the field floods. Close the gate, the field drains. 3 harvests a year. Gravity did the work. The engineers just had to slope the land correctly. And the slopes were absurd. Khmer engineers graded the landscape by centimeters per kilometer. A canal might drop 5 centimeters over a distance of 3 kilometers. That is a gradient of 0.00167. You cannot see it with your eyes. You can only see it when the water moves. And the water moved exactly where they wanted it to move. The entire city was a tilted plain. Water entered from the north through the Siem Reap River. It was captured in the Barais. It was released through the canal network. It irrigated the fields. It drained into the Tonle Sap Lake to the south. The city sat in the middle of that flow. It controlled the flow. The king who controlled the sluice gates controlled the rice. The king who controlled the rice controlled the empire. The temple was not just a religious center. It was the hydraulic command node, the place where the water system was visualized, ritualized, and managed. The layout of Angkor Wat mirrors the Hindu cosmos. The central tower is Mount Meru. The galleries are mountain ranges. The moat is the ocean of milk. But the cosmology is also a site plan. The water represents the physical water flowing through the canals outside. The temple is a map of the system it controls. The scale of that system only became visible in the 21st century. Before LiDAR, archaeologists knew about the major temples and the big reservoirs. They did not know about the grid. The laser scanning revealed a fractal urban structure. Every neighborhood had ponds. Every house mound had a small reservoir connected to a local channel. The channels connected to larger canals. The canals connected to the Barais. The Barais connected to the river. The entire city was plumbed. There were no standalone structures. Every building sat inside a hydraulic network. The network was the city. Without the water, there is no city. Without the Barais, there is no water. Without the embankments, there are no Barais. The whole system is interdependent. It is a machine, and machines fail. The failure mode was slow. Then it was fast. The system worked for 400 years. It supported a population estimated at up to 1 million people across the greater Angkor region. That made it the largest urban area in the pre-industrial world. Larger than Rome at its peak. Larger than Constantinople. Larger than any Chinese capital of the same period. The population density was possible because the water system produced surplus food. 3 rice harvests per year. Controlled flooding. Controlled drainage. Predictable yields. The surplus funded the temples. It funded the army. It funded the king. But the system had a weak point. Silt. The canals were not lined with stone. They were earthen channels. Every monsoon, topsoil washed into the system. Sediment accumulated. The channels became shallow. The flow slowed. The fields flooded unevenly. The system required constant dredging, constant labor, constant maintenance. As long as the state could mobilize that labor, the system held. When the state weakened, the channels clogged. And the state weakened because the system overextended. Angkor kept growing. More temples, more population, more fields, more canals. The hydraulic network expanded to the limits of the terrain. By the 13th century, the system was at maximum capacity. Then, the climate turned. Tree ring data from the region shows that the 14th century brought mega droughts, followed by extreme monsoons. The droughts lasted decades. The reservoirs dropped. The fields dried. The rice yields collapsed. Then, the monsoons returned with violence. Floods overwhelmed the canals. Embankments breached. Silt poured into the system faster than it could be cleared. The network began to fail in sections. Engineers tried to patch it. Archaeologists have found crude stone repairs in the later phases of the canal system. Desperate fixes, reactive maintenance, the kind of work you do when you no longer have the resources to rebuild properly. The system was too large to fix and too interconnected to fail gracefully. When one section collapsed, the failure cascaded. Upstream reservoirs could not drain, downstream fields could not flood. The machine seized. There is another factor, deforestation. To expand the rice fields, the Khmer cleared forests. The forests had stabilized the soil. Without the trees, the topsoil eroded faster. The sediment load in the rivers increased, the canals filled faster. The feedback loop accelerated. More fields required more water. More water required more canals. More canals required more dredging. More dredging required more labor. More labor required more food. More food required more fields. The system ate itself. By the 15th century, the hydraulic network was collapsing. The population declined. The temples were abandoned. The jungle returned. But the infrastructure remained. The embankments, the reservoirs, the moat around Angkor Wat. The stone that had been the control node of a million-person city became a religious site maintained by monks. The water system became invisible. The story became a story about a temple. The machine was forgotten. But here is what nobody noticed for 600 years. The temple still floats. The moat still regulates the water table. The sand platform still drains. The foundation has not cracked. Angkor Wat survived the collapse of the system because it was built to survive the system. The engineers who designed it understood that the hydraulic network was fragile. They understood that the canals would clog. They understood that the barrays might fail. So they built the temple to be hydrologically independent. The moat is a closed loop. It does not rely on the canal network to stay full. It captures rainwater. It captures groundwater. It self-regulates. The temple was designed to outlast the city. And it did. The city collapsed. The temple remained. The moat still holds water. The stone still stands. The foundation still floats. That is not an accident. That is a design decision. The question is why. One possibility is that the builders knew the system was temporary. They knew the canals would fail. They knew the population could not be sustained indefinitely, so they built the temple as a monument to the system, not as part of the system. A record in stone of a hydraulic civilization that would eventually vanish. The temple is a snapshot of the network at its peak. The layout is a diagram. The moat is a working model. The galleries are a catalog of the engineering principles that made the city possible. Angkor Wat is not just a religious structure. It is a technical manual, a message in stone that says, this is how we moved water. This is how we fed 1 million people. This is how we built an empire in a floodplain. The temple is the archive. The city is gone. The archive remains. Another possibility is that the temple was always intended to be the survivor. The rest of the city was expendable. The temples were permanent. The houses were wood. The canals were earth. The temples were stone. When the system collapsed, the wood rotted. The earth eroded. The stone endured. The temples were not built for the living. They were built for the dead, for the gods, for the future. They were built to outlast the empire. And they did. Angkor Wat was completed in the early 12th century. The empire collapsed in the 15th century. The temple stood for 300 years after the city died. It is still standing now. That is not luck. That is intent. The engineers built it to survive the failure of everything around it. The moat makes that possible. Without the moat, the foundation would have cracked within decades of the canal network collapsing. With the moat, the temple can float indefinitely. As long as the monsoon rains keep falling, the moat will stay full. As long as the moat stays full, the foundation stays stable. As long as the foundation stays stable, the stone stays standing. The temple is a closed hydraulic system. It is independent. It is immortal. But the deeper question is what the temple was controlling. The official story says Angkor Wat was built by King Suryavarman II as a state temple dedicated to Vishnu. That story is not wrong. It is incomplete. The temple sits at the southern edge of the Angkor complex. It is aligned east-west. Most Khmer temples are aligned east-west because they follow the path of the sun. Angkor Wat is different. It is aligned so that on the spring equinox, the sun rises directly over the central tower and reflects in the western moat. That alignment is not symbolic. It is calendrical. The temple is a solar observatory. The equinox marks the midpoint of the agricultural calendar. It marks the moment when the dry season ends and the monsoon begins. It marks the moment when the sluice gates open and the water flows into the fields. The temple does not just represent the water system, it times the water system. The king who stood at the temple on the equinox and watched the sun rise over the central tower was performing a hydraulic ritual. He was opening the gates. He was releasing the water. He was starting the flood. The temple was the clock. The water was the mechanism. The fields were the output. And the fields were everywhere. LiDAR shows that the urban grid extended for hundreds of square kilometers in every direction. The residential zones were not separate from the agricultural zones. They were the same thing. Houses sat on raised mounds. Ponds sat between the mounds. Rice fields sat between the ponds. Canals connected the ponds. The city was a sponge. It absorbed water during the monsoon. It released water during the dry season. It buffered the extremes. The system was not centralized. It was distributed. Every household managed its own water. Every neighborhood managed its own ponds. The badais were not the system. They were the backup. They were the reserve capacity. They were the buffer that kept the local network supplied when the monsoon was late or the dry season was long. The temple did not control the water directly. It controlled the calendar. It told people when to open their gates, when to flood their fields, when to drain them, when to plant, when to harvest. The temple was the central clock in a distributed hydraulic network. The network ran itself. The temple just kept time. That changes what the collapse means. The official story says the Khmer Empire fell because of war, invasion, and internal strife. That is true, but it is not the whole truth. The empire fell because the hydraulic system failed, and the hydraulic system failed because it became too rigid. The early system was flexible. Local networks managed local water. The berets were emergency storage. The temples were ritual centers. The system could absorb shocks. If one canal failed, the others kept working. If one beret dried up, the local ponds took over. The system was resilient. But as the empire grew, the system centralized. The berets became larger, the canals became longer, the sluice gates became more important. The local networks became dependent on the central infrastructure. When the megadroughts hit, the local ponds dried up. The fields relied on the berets. The berets relied on the rivers. The rivers dropped. The system had no backup. It failed all at once. The temple could not fix that. The calendar could not fix that. The king could not fix that. The water was gone. But Angkor Wat survived because it was never dependent on the rivers. The moat is fed by groundwater and rain. It does not need the Siem Reap River. It does not need the berets. It is hydrologically independent. That independence was engineered. The temple was built to survive the collapse of the system it represented. That is not a coincidence. That is a message. The message is that the system was always temporary. The water would always run out. The canals would always clog. The empire would always fall. But the temple would remain. The stone would remember. The moat would still hold water. The foundation would still float. The knowledge would survive. Angkor Wat is not a monument to a living empire. It is a monument to a dead one. It was built to be a ruin. It was built to outlast the civilization that created it. And it has. The hydraulic city is still there. You can see it from orbit. The embankments are visible as lines in the vegetation. The berets are visible as rectangular depressions. The canal grid is visible as a faint network of shadows in the agricultural fields. The city never disappeared. It was always there. It was just invisible to people walking on the ground. The jungle hid it. The fields plowed over it. The modern villages built on top of it. But the structure remained. The LiDAR did not discover a lost city. It revealed a city that was always present. A city that had been turned into farmland and forest, but never erased. The temples were the only part of the city built to be seen. The rest of the city was built to be used. And when it stopped being used, it became invisible. But it is still there. The bones of the machine are still in the ground. Angkor Wat is not a temple in the jungle. It is the last standing control node of a pre-industrial hydraulic megacity that covered more than 1,000 square kilometers and supported more than 1 million people by moving water, with nothing but gravity, dirt, and calendar rituals. The moat is not decoration. It is a hydraulic stabilizer that keeps 1.5 million tons of stone floating on sand. The layout is not symbolic. It is a site plan for a water distribution network that produced 3 rice harvests per year. The alignment is not mystical. It is a solar calendar that timed the flooding of hundreds of square kilometers of rice fields. The temple is not a monument to a god. It is a monument to a machine. A machine that failed. A machine that drowned in its own silt. A machine that could not survive the climate it was built to control. But the temple survived. The stone still stands. The moat still holds water. The foundation still floats. And the machine is still there, buried under 600 years of soil, waiting for the next laser scan to strip away the surface and show the world what a hydraulic civilization looks like when it fossilizes. The temple is not the mystery. The city is the mystery. And the city is everywhere.